We are pleased to welcome Brittany Payne, Content Strategist and Project Manager for Stories Incorporated, as well as Anna Lippy, Project Manager and Content Strategist for Stories Incorporated. They're going to discuss how leading brands use employee stories to communicate their DEI progress and strategy. Brittany, Anna, we're excited to have this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. We're Anna and Brittany, and we're project managers and content strategists at Stories Inc. This year, we've worked with some of the most progressive companies to create content that supports their DEI commitment and progress. Today, we're going to share our tips. Before we get started, we wanted to give some context. Why has employee storytelling become such an important part of your DEI and recruitment marketing strategy?
So in 2020, organizations really reflected on their part in racial discrimination and inclusivity. In response, they crafted corporate statements. While rooted in good intentions, these communication efforts were ineffective and dismissed by their audiences. Sometimes they even produced additional scrutiny or more calls for accountability, with candidates, employees, and the public responding with doubt or a chorus of "show me your board." And the public is right to demand more. So why the backlash? Those corporate responses were tried and true consumer marketing strategies. I'm talking forward-looking and jargon corporate statements and graphics. And there were videos featuring company leadership, stock photos and footage, and hired voiceovers. The most important voices were missing. That's where employee stories come in. Companies didn't realize that their audiences really needed to hear from the employees. They are the people who experience and from the culture that results from organizational actions, attitudes, and values.
Employee stories are the best way to prove your DEI progress, and they're versatile. Employee stories are used to recruit new employees as well as educate and engage existing employees. I actually used to work in internal comms, and employee stories were our best performing content. And you can create them in any medium optimized per channel. Here's a list of some of the content that we've created. Today, we're going to share our insights from working with lots of organizations to communicate and market their DEI progress and plans to candidates and employees. First, ground and prove your claims with stories. Second, maximize engagement with timely posting. Third, honor the story and the storyteller. And we call our employee participants storytellers, so you'll be hearing that word a lot today. And last, weave stories together to show the cultural concept is pervasive. We have a lot to cover and want to leave time for your questions, so let's dive in. How do we do it? Our first tip is to ground your plans and progress with employee stories. For example, Dell Technologies made a commitment to have gender parity by 2030. But to prove this claim, we uncovered stories that showed that Dell Technologies has the support in place to create a place where women can thrive. In this video, their big, audacious goal is announced. Then we proved the progress and seriousness of the commitment by including stories of how women employees around the world have been supported in their career and personal lives. That shows women candidates that Dell Technologies is ready for them and serious about creating a place where they can thrive.
One of the times that really stood out for me as far as being encouraged as a female within the company is when I was in the heat of my pursuit for leadership and I became pregnant, and I told my superior of the news, and I was met with such love and encouragement, and I was also encouraged to go out there for those interviews when those opportunities came. And shortly after coming back from maternity leave, I began my leadership journey. To be able to have that, it was a blessing.
Dell Technologies really walked the talk when it comes to empowering women. We set a commitment that by the year 2030, 50% of our workforce will be women and 40% of our leadership will be women.
I'm a very passionate engineer who loves to identify and solve customer issues or deliver something which is cutting edge and industry leading. I have 13 patents now.
You have so much room to grow, so much room to develop. Dell Technologies, it's never still, it's always changing.
I was nominated for a job rotation program. So this is a big change for me. I'm very happy my contributions are recognized and valued, and let me feel very engaged and inspired to do my best.
I'm co-lead for Women in Action here in Montpellier. We have to keep the focus on working towards professional equity between women and men within Dell Technologies.
We help women to climb their career ladder, maintain a healthy work-life balance. I can support my son, I'm successful at work.
I cycle long distances. I also took up running and adventure sports and trekking. And that's because of the culture and the work-life balance.
There are a lot of women-focused trainings, whether it is presentation skills, confidence building, financial acumen, business acumen, which actually help you think beyond what you are doing today. One of the things we have is Hour of Codes. We have a group of ladies. They will learn to code in 1 hour.
I've been able to do STEM, engineering, arts, and math with young girls. We put on an event called STEAMapalooza. They had robots, online gaming, and fun ways to code. They got a stamp at each station. It was really cool to showcase all the possibilities there are for girls and keep their interest in that.
I have a lot of autonomy, a lot of flexibility, and I feel that my leaders and my team members believe in me. Dell Technologies really values its people. Like, I feel so valued as a human being.
I love this video. I actually interviewed all of the storytellers in their home country, and it was so inspiring. A lot of DEI messaging is taking the concept of supporting their employees' whole self or allowing them to sort of be their authentic selves. That sounds great, but it's actually meaningless unless you have employee stories to back it up. Here's an example of how EJ brings his whole self to work at AstraZeneca.
An opportunity where I've expressed my vulnerability was around the killing of George Floyd. I thought it was important to lead in this time of need. So I recorded a video about exactly how I felt. I was hurt, I was upset, I was disappointed. I went through all these different phases and I put it out there. And so many people reached out and said, thank you. And I helped unfreeze a lot of people that day by just being vulnerable and letting them know it's okay.
So EJ's story is definitely really inspiring. Our next tip is to use time to your advantage. It's not enough to have great content. You also need to think through how and when you're going to use this content to maximize engagement. Marketing basic principle is to be timely with your message and content, which increases audience engagement. To get the most out of your D&I content, time it's released during monthly celebrations and holidays. So major disclaimer, you don't want to just post LGBTQ plus content during Pride Month, for example, but you absolutely want to take advantage and show support at a time when the world is ready to see it. And it helps you plan ahead and think of the stories you want to tell when they'll have the most impact or engagement. This video from LabCorp weaves many stories together to show how the company supports their LGBTQ plus colleagues.
I'm part of the LGBT community, and it's extremely important for me to make sure that people understand that LabCorp is a very open and inclusive environment. A couple of years ago, I wrote a blog post as part of Pride Month. It was centered around my journey as part of the LGBT community, but also about the importance of an inclusive workforce. The response to that was fantastic. It was really impactful and meaningful to have people that you've never met before really identifying with you and with your journey.
I'm working on developing trainings for trans and non-binary competency for different groups within the company. I attended a boot camp that the Pride ERG paid for me to do. So I'm a certified trainer for trans and non-binary competency. People tend to be very grateful for the training because it's usually something that they have not been exposed to before. And it absolutely was not something that I would have expected, trying to give their employees the tools that they need in order to give respectful and affirming care to trans and non-binary patients. So that's meant a huge amount to me. I never considered the possibility that I would be openly out as a non-binary person in a professional setting.
I believe that being able to be fully me in the totality, Black, gay, male, young adult, really brings value to the organization because, one, I can relate to most anyone. I understand people where they are. I am an example that anyone can succeed, but it does take work. And when you get to a place where you feel frustrated or challenged, I definitely believe that I and many others are there to walk with you and to stand by you and to let you know that you have resources to make sure we all are appreciated and respected.
So yes, they launched this video during June, but the stories are relevant all year long. They plan to reuse throughout the year and throughout different channels. So how do you get employees to share their experiences with you? That leads us to tip 3. To get great stories, you must honor the story and the storyteller experience. We believe the best way to get great stories is to facilitate the process.
Absolutely. At Stories Inc., the employee storyteller experience is very important to us. We actually obsess over it, I'd say. We recommend facilitating the experience from start to finish. That means you're scheduling, prepping, and interviewing storytellers and building rapport along the way. So that way, when you actually sit down with an employee for the interview, you can start the conversation at a higher and more comfortable level instead of introducing yourself for the first time.
Right. You want to focus on the storyteller's comfort. You can uncover the best stories when your storytellers are comfortable sharing their real experiences. This builds on what Anna said about facilitating the whole process so people feel like they know you before there's a camera. Additionally, you should start with softball questions like, what happened on your favorite day at work? Or tell me about your most memorable experience at work, before you ask or dive into harder questions about, like, tell me how you came out to your coworkers, or maybe tell me about a difficult time at work. So for example, during a virtual story session, one of the storytellers was particularly shy. She was giving one-word answers, so I noticed she had a Harry Potter book bag, and I quickly struck up a conversation about, which Harry Potter house are you in? So that 2-minute, by the way, personally, I'm Team Slytherin. We can debate later. So that 2-minute conversation about the Wizarding World built enough bond for us to really dive into hardball questions and resulted in better stories.
Brittany really is a Harry Potter fanatic. We recommend prioritizing quality and consistency to honor the story. Employee stories should be honored with consistent, great quality audio and video. We think this is always important to make sure the story doesn't get lost because the viewer is distracted by a fuzzy visual or muffled sound, but it's especially important when creating DEI content. You don't want one person's audio to sound off and the next to be crystal clear, so consistency is really important. And you want to make your storytellers proud. So you want them to eventually share with their own networks. And this is most likely to happen when they look and sound great, when their story is edited to include photos and B-roll, animations, and graphics. Optimize your story, especially for the channel on which you're sharing them. Remember the tip that a great story is part of the work. The other piece is how you're going to engage the viewer. Whether it's on your career site, intranet, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Glassdoor profile, tailor the content for the medium and the audience.
You also want to honor the story and storyteller by giving space to tell the story without losing audience engagement. In this example, we give Kirsten this space to share her story, which also has several cultural takeaways.
Sometimes we are our worst critics, and sometimes the belief and the opportunity and the potential somebody sees in me can be greater than what I see in myself. When I was a senior director of marketing, I was at a point in my career where I had to really look around and say, what should I do next? Most commercial leaders in our organization have sales experience, and I hadn't had any sales experience to date. And I remember talking to one of the senior leaders at the time saying, you know, I think I should go out and do a regional sales role. And that individual at the time looked at me and said, well, maybe you should be a national sales director. That leader said, Kirsten, don't you think that potentially all these skills that you've demonstrated would apply to making you a very good national sales leader? I went for the big job. I competed for it. I actually, out of a really competitive pool of individuals, landed the job. My first sales job in this organization was as a national sales director. And as a leader of a large organization with a lot of people who ask me about their own career development, I see that as my key role. Like, where do I find in that person maybe some promise, some potential, some opportunity that that individual doesn't see? That's when you start to see magic happen within the organization. And that's when people have their largest impact.
So in addition to Kirsten's takeaways, her manager believed in her. She is now that type of manager and leader for her team. AZ also framed her story to talk about imposter syndrome, which affects some women leaders.
Guilty.
Our last tip is to create content that weaves together multiple perspectives around a topic. You want to show it's not just the one person that experiences an inclusive culture, it's pervasive throughout your organization.
Here's an example using some of the storytellers you've already seen. You can get a lot of stories from just one interview, so definitely reuse and repurpose them.
When I came to AstraZeneca, I decided that I was going to retire from being my unauthentic self. I wanted to be myself all the time, and AstraZeneca allowed me to be that person.
differentiator with AstraZeneca is truly feeling included and having a seat at the table, regardless of your level in the organization. I think they do a great job at making sure your voice is heard.
I'm an immigrant to this country. I came to the US 22 years ago with a piece of luggage and a lot of courage and enthusiasm. So clearly my upbringing is totally different than the one of my peers. I've been able to speak up, challenge each other ideas. Ultimately, our strength is our diversity.
An opportunity where I've expressed my vulnerability was around the killing of George Floyd. I thought
We've stopped it here since you've already seen EJ's story earlier. You can access the entire video if you like in the presentation download or on AstraZeneca's YouTube channel. Now, you may not have realized that the AstraZeneca storytellers featured were actually not filmed on site at the office. We captured their stories virtually from their home offices using a green screen. So you can capture high quality employee story content outside of the office, which leads us to a bonus tip.
Bonus tip, remove barriers to add perspectives. The more perspectives you can include in your employee story project, the stronger your D&I content is going to be. But sometimes it's easy to rule out employees because of factors like location. You can remove geographic barriers and increase employee participations globally without having to sacrifice visual quality. Once COVID hit, we applied our methods to create virtual story sessions, and almost all of our work became global as a result. This graphic shows the global locations of storytellers we've interviewed. Capturing stories no matter where we work, capturing stories no matter where work happens also more accurately reflects today's hybrid workforce. For D&I content, it also gives more employees the chance to tell their stories.
It really does. That's a great point. In addition to capturing global culture, you can also personalize global content per market or local audience too. Here's an example of a story we captured for Philips on a global story project. This team member is actually based in Panama, and her story serves as compelling content for the global brand, as well as speaking directly to Latin American and local talent.
Philips me ha brindado varias oportunidades. Si yo miro para atrás, me siento muy orgullosa de haber elegido trabajar en Philips y de que Philips me haya depositado tanta confianza. Mi papá siempre tuvo un sueño que era que yo fuera doctora. Yo recibí la llamada de Recursos Humanos llamándome para decir que había pasado en la entrevista y conseguido el trabajo en Philips. Me recuerdo haber dicho a mi papá que estaba súper orgullosa, que de alguna manera estaba cumpliendo el sueño de él, que era trabajar en una empresa voltada a equipos médicos salvando vidas de personas. Tuve la oportunidad de empezar con la cadena de suplementos en supply chain. Luego de allí recibí la oportunidad de trabajar en equipo de mejora de procesos. Tuve una segunda oportunidad también para seguir en este rol, sin embargo, para el mercado de América Latina. Y con eso me vine a Panamá. Cuando recibí la oportunidad de la propuesta de venir a Panamá, yo sentía que la empresa me había escuchado. Estaba súper emocionada porque tener una carrera fuera de mi país, hablar otro idioma, aprender español, o sea, desarrollarme con otras culturas, y estaba realizando un sueño personal también. Hoy lidero un equipo de 19 personas y eso todo porque Philips creyó que yo pudiera aportar para el equipo de finanzas. El hecho de que yo haya empezado como analista y que hoy tenga una posición de liderazgo me hace muy orgullosa de donde estoy. Philips es una empresa que me inspira a ser mejor todos los días.
So I know we've packed a lot into our half hour, but if you remember one thing, it's that employee stories are the best way to communicate your D&I plans and progress. And if you're going to remember a few other things, keep our tips in mind. 1, ground and prove your claims with stories. Maximize engagement with timely postings. Honor the story and the storyteller. Weave stories together to show the culture concept is pervasive, and remove barriers to add perspectives. And don't worry, we will follow up and shoot you guys an email with a few more tips.
Thanks for letting us share our experiences developing DEI content with you. We'd love to answer any questions and keep the conversation going. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Brittany and Anna. That was full of a lot of amazing examples of wonderful content. I love the tips, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot of follow-up questions and downloads, but we do have some. Let's dive right into some of the audience questions that were coming through during your presentation today. The first two are kind of related, so I'm going to provide them at the same time. So it's the idea of how are you actually convincing the team members to share their stories? You know, are you giving them compensation ahead of time? Do they know that there's going to be a reward? What's in it for them? How do you get them to agree to do this?
Sure. Yeah, it actually is a great way to honor team members. So many of our clients use it as kind of a recognition tool. And there's so many stories to share. Team members want to share. We are not in search for storyteller participants. There's so much eagerness to share experiences and stories. And so generally it's used as kind of a recognition tool and a way to kind of help promote the culture.
Agreed, totally.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's true. People like to talk, right? People like to share their stories. But like you mentioned earlier, the one person with the Harry Potter backpack, though, there is always some hesitancy, even if someone agrees to do something. Maybe it doesn't flow as easily. Have you, to kind of allow people to feel more comfortable? One of the questions brought up a really good point from Audra. Do you provide people the questions ahead of time, and depending on your answer, do you feel like if you do that, does it steer them in a certain direction?
Yeah, it's a good question too.
Yeah, so we try to not provide them with all of the questions. So we do give them a couple, like a sample, and give them a theme around what we're talking about. But I've just learned from experience that if you provide them with 20 or 30 questions, then one, they freak out because they're like, I gotta make up 20 different answers. Or they're more robotic because they've memorized their answers to their questions. So something else that I do to make people feel comfortable, like if I'm on a virtual storytelling session and I see like maybe you have like kid awards in the background, or I notice that there's like you're looking off camera, I'll say sometimes like, oh, hi Cara, is everything okay? And they're like, well, I have my 3-year-old here. So I'll tell a story about like my wonderful 3-year-old niece and how she likes to like explode on all of my days. And then now we have a shared thought or story we don't have to talk about work right now. We can off track 5 to 7 minutes to talk about something else just to come back to our stories and our questions.
Yeah, and it's a good point too, just around, I think there's sort of a misconception that people have to be outgoing or celebrities or have a super extroverted personality to do well with this methodology. And it's actually not the case. We get excellent stories from every person, even if they're shy and not what you would necessarily think of as camera ready. So that's kind of where, we kind of build rapport, like Brittany said, and really help them feel comfortable through the process of facilitating and through storyteller prep.
Right. Anna just made a really good point, and then I definitely want you to ask another question, but introverts actually tell the best stories, and people are always surprised by that. And that's because one, they get to the story very quickly. And it's very fact-based, like this happened on this day, this is how it made me feel, and this is the story. They are some of the best storytellers.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to circle back to kind of one of the focuses of the presentation with regard to the DE&I content. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of organizations that we've seen, throughout the day, and the different speakers, everyone's kind of at a different point internally within their company. So one question that popped up was, what do you do if your company is actually working on improving their diversity, but they're just not there yet?
Mm-hmm. Right. I think the best thing to do, this is a great question, in that situation is just to be honest. be upfront, be honest, even if you haven't started yet and you're using this project to create your D&I messaging out there. Employee stories are the most important here. We recommend talking about your plans and progress, featuring as many employees as you can, but making sure that the employees that are actually being affected by the topics that you're talking about in these D&I projects are the ones that are getting to tell their stories.
Mm-hmm. And to kind of a follow-up would be, what DEI content do you think is the best? And you can each answer. We'll get battle of the opinions here, unless you agree.
Sure. So it's fine to create like a D&I video, but just one video really isn't enough to show everything that you're doing. So we, recommend a full content library that, kind of weaves together many stories. So as many perspectives as possible is best, but, of course you have to start somewhere.
Right. My favorite D&I content, or what I think is the best D&I content, isn't the content that like hits you in the face, or isn't this is how I feel I can be myself at work. Like, take me on a journey. Tell me a story about how your culture really comes to life. And I don't want to talk you to death and give you an example, but the best D&I content is just authentic content. It's not the content that marketing wrote for you. It's a storyteller sitting down and them actually telling you about their day-to-day or their coworkers or the culture at your company, and the D&I story coming from that.
Right. Yes. It's nice to hear it directly. Well, I think that we are pretty much out of time, ladies, but thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Feel free to connect attendees, connect directly, and hopefully we'll see you around engaging at the networking lounge today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate participating.